Hello, this is Audiobooks with Anna, and I'm your host, Anna Clements. In this episode, we chat with Jane Love. Join us to find out about the SAG AFTRA National Director of Audiobooks. She fills us in on the latest news, updates us on contracts and possibilities for working within the union, and shares her journey and her insights into the fabulous world of audiobooks. I'm hoping to chat with Jane about her life, her time in this creative industry. She's very well respected within the industry. So as a non-member, I have been impressed by the things I've heard. So I'm really looking forward to getting to know Jane better. And then if you have any questions as an audience member, you know the drill, put your question in the chat. I've had several people send in questions who can't be here today, which is lovely. And already in the chat, Finley Stevens says, Jane is the actual best. Actual in capital letters. There's a lot of love in the room for you, Jane. So welcome, and thank you very much for joining me here today.
I'm delighted. I'm sorry. I thought I was supposed to wait a couple of minutes and let you do your...
Don't apologize at all. It's an absolute pleasure. I'm thrilled. I'm assuming it's your lunchtime now, is it?
Sure, absolutely.
Are you based on the East Coast?
I am. I'm just outside of Washington, D.C.
Lovely. Well, thank you very much for spending this hour with us. Jane, if you don't mind, do take us back a minute to the before times. How did all this begin for you? What's your story?
Oh, my goodness. So as of June 5th, today's the 7th, right? So as of Monday, I've been with the union for 34 years.
Wow.
And I know, hard to believe, I started working in film and television as a freelance production coordinator here in the DC area. Richmond, Baltimore was very hot at the time. And my boss for a very long time at the union happened to call me after a particularly difficult film shoot and sort of offered me a job sight unseen, a very entry-level position in what was then called the Washington, Baltimore local of AFTRA SAG. It was prior to the merger of the unions. And needless to say, I stuck around and loved it. I spent many, many years as the associate executive director of the Washington Mid-Atlantic local, both before and after the merger of Screen Actors Guild and the American Federation of Television and Radio Artists, and fell into the audiobook thing quite by accident. I guess I had always been listed on some AFTRA handouts, and I mean literal paper handouts, as a contact for audiobooks. And I suspect it was because many of you may know Grover Gardner, the wonderful Grover Gardner, who came out of this region, as did Sean Pratt and Michael Kramer and Jen Mendenhall and the late, great Ralph Kosham and others. And I would speak with some of them sort of regularly. But at any rate, AFTRA really didn't have a very good answer to people who wanted to know what to do with their audiobook work, candidly. And in 2008, I was asked to help negotiate with this little-known company called Audible.
Back in 2008, Audible wasn't necessarily a big deal yet.
No, they weren't really a big deal. But and I please feel free to interrupt me if I go on too long. But the landscape at that time was that the union had a contract with exactly 3 companies. Recorded Books, who we all know and love. They've been a signatory since like 1987. And 2 other companies that have since gone out of business, all in New York. So there was quite a bit of union work going on in New York and none going on elsewhere, as far as I know. And all of the major publishers were claiming at the time that they didn't use people from home studios, all that sort of attitude at the time. So when Audible came into being, I was asked to help negotiate with them. I wasn't able to do that at the time, given my other responsibilities. And so I threw my colleague, Rich Larkin, under the bus and suggested that he might be a good person to take the lead with that company. He and my former colleague, Ralph Brown, literally flew into APAC in LA for one day, in and out in one day, chased down Beth Anderson, harangued her about coming up with an agreement, and together with the New York narrator member community who withheld services then voluntarily, they did a sort of a voluntary work stoppage. We got this first agreement with Audible. And boy, does it look a lot different than what we have today, right?
Can I just ask, for the sake of those of us who aren't members and may or may not know what it means to be within the union, which is going to be part and parcel of this whole conversation today, I think, what's a signatory?
Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, it's a company. No. It is a company that signs a contract with the union, pledging basically to honor all of the terms and conditions of that collective bargaining agreement, that union contract. They pledge to honor those minimum terms with any and all narrators, US-based narrators, I might add, that they hire, regardless of membership.
So you're saying that Rich and Ralph went down to LA, to Audible, to speak to them about becoming one of these company that was willing to maintain these standards, as it were?
Well, yeah, they went to APAC, actually, to sort of harangue her there. They were Audible, of course, is in Newark, New Jersey, but they cornered her. They encouraged her to speak to them. They were having informal conversations. And then, frankly, what put it over the finish line was sort of a job action on the part of the New York narrators, because at that time, Audible was bringing people into their, pretty much exclusively bringing them into their studios. So it was a membership effort and it was a staff effort combined. So that was really the big breakthrough that led to so many other successes since then, really.
Yeah, absolutely. I can see that it was the setting that stage for everybody else to follow on, because Audible has become, they have 80% of the market share. And it's certainly, as a non-member, I am still grateful and lucky to be able to use the SAG AFTRA standards as my standards. So I'm thrilled. So thank you for the work that you've done, just as an aside. It is absolutely brilliant. So move us forward then. So this is 2008. You're still the Washington representative.
I'm still the Washington representative, and I really have very little to do with this success, to be fair. And the next thing that happens is that I get angry that for many, many years, I have been told that I have to use what some of you who are members may know about. I have to use a contract called the Sound Recordings Code, which applies to musical artists, but has provisions for like cast albums and things of that nature. And so there are narrator and actor provisions. And it didn't work. It's a contract that doesn't work for audiobooks because it is all on a studio hour basis. So I am thrilled that we get an agreement with Audible that is more in line with how the audiobook industry works. But I'm angry that it has taken us so long and that nobody else seems to be able to go that route, right? And so I call Rich Larkin and I call Ralph Brown and I called the late, great Richard Ferrone, who was the chair of the Audiobook Steering Committee. And I say, I want you to come to Washington, D.C., and I want you to talk about how you were able to do this to the incredible group of professional narrators who are, hiding behind pseudonyms and working from home studios. And I want to try to expand the opportunity to get health benefits and a pension and et cetera, through union contracts in audiobooks. And it was a wonderful experience where all those wonderful people that I named earlier and more showed up around a table. And within a couple of days, we had more signatories. We had, thanks to the members who were there. And this is not a personal plug, but, Sean Pratt was the first to bring us Gilles Dana of Gildan Media thereafter. Then we expanded to LA, and it was Dan Zitt made it very easy by saying that Penguin Random House would gladly work, with the union and help narrators get benefits. In fact, he came to a meeting with the Los Angeles narrator community who had been working at Books on Tape in Woodland Hills. He brought Dan Musselman and he explained that they did not have any problem with it. And so people should not be afraid to support the union. And then there were others that were a lot more difficult. And I'll close by saying, if it took 2 years and a lot of heartache to get Tantor to come to the table prior to the acquisition by RB Media. it took an equal amount of pain and suffering to get brilliance to come aboard. But our partnerships with all of those entities are really remarkable and positive and cooperative and collaborative at this point, I'm happy to say.
Absolutely. And again, I need to reiterate, I'm incredibly grateful, as are, I'm sure, everybody here and everybody listening afterwards. Is, the effect it has on our lives is, well, I can't even begin to imagine what it would mean if you weren't around doing all these jobs. So can I distract you from your job and ask you, the Jane that went to Washington and became started off within the industry, before that, did you know you were going to be somebody who would require this much diplomacy and skills in organizing people? And I always imagine people who work within unions and love their jobs, as you appear to do. It's a personality type almost. Like you're looking.
I think that's right. Although I never would have been accused of being diplomatic before. That's the truth. I grew up in this area. I live in Northern Virginia in a little town called Fairfax, for any of you who are familiar with the region. I went to the University of Virginia. I was an English major. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I got a master's in journalism and public affairs from American University. And while there, literally tripped into an opportunity to work on a film. My cousin at the time was the director of the Virginia Film Office, which is every state has, as part of your economic development or tourism office, you have somebody who tries to get film, Hollywood to come to their state. And he was that. So I fell into this opportunity. I did it for a little while. I took this entry-level job at the union, having no idea that I would be suited for it. And honestly, I don't say this lightly. I loved every bit of those 30 years that I worked in the local. But the part starting in early 2009 with audiobooks, where that began to really take over my life, is the best part of the journey. And in such that I got so entrenched that during the pandemic, the union finally saw fit to create an audiobooks department, give us a budget, give me a full-time position in audiobooks and letting go of the other duties. And since then, I've even been able to bring on another full-time person in Andrea Henderson, who many of you may have communicated with, I don't know, who's making my life so much easier.
I'm sure it's a team effort now, which is always wonderful, the collaboration. So talk us through then, Jane. So we've got to 2009, everybody's starting to get on board, which is absolutely fantastic. We must take a moment to commend you, because I don't think it's the kind of thing that, 10 years too late, you look back and go, we should have taken this by the horns when we could. And actually you did, at a time when it was growing and nobody saw what was coming. The audio market has just exploded, and you had already put in place these things that allowed us to be able to sort of corral it as best we could.
I appreciate that very much. I have to say, I think that, part of my frustration is actually how late to the party maybe we were. So I love that there isn't that frustration in this group, but I really thought about people who were closer to their retirement age, not having benefited from it, for all those years, when just a little out of the box creative thinking could perhaps have changed that. But you are right. We used things to our advantage. That Audible boom in 2013, that is really what enabled us to corral Tantor. People were so busy at that time that we were in a position to ask members to please withhold services from Tantor until they actually got serious, because, we had been dillying around with them for 2 years. And I think it was because there was so much work available elsewhere that was a success. And I do want to say really quickly, just to give people a little perspective, especially newer people, when we first got a contract with Tantor, they were paying people, I'm not obviously going to name names, but they were paying people that you all know and love, that are audiobook narrators of the year, et cetera, like $150 per finished hour with nothing, with no health and retirement contribution. Our first union contract minimum was $162. in, I think, 2013. I would have to look. We have come such a long way. Our first contract with Audible we had to exclude romance from coverage. We, had rates of, I don't remember, but, thereabouts 160 or so. And their minimums for people with any sort of level of experience are well over 260 plus the health and retirement contribution now. Those are just minimum scales. So it really has been remarkable. We've codified AI protections and payment for reuse of recordings in other media, the way corrections are delivered to you, 1 hour minimums. There's still a lot to do, though, and that's exciting as well.
We're going to come to AI because I've had a couple of questions sent in, so that's in a little while. I'm going to come back. That's going to be a longer conversation, I'm sure. So we've got everybody on board, Tantor included. We're setting minimum rates. We're starting to use the term "we" very loosely. You are starting to
No, feel free.
move forward with conversations with it all from the outside. It feels really collaborative. It feels like you're having actual conversations with people and saying, what is it you want? What is it you need? Is that how you feel that it's come about?
I think that I do want to give a little credit to senior management of both the prior union AFTRA and SAG AFTRA for giving us a lot of latitude. One of the frustrations I know that the community of narrators may feel is how confusing it can all be, right? Because we have 90 or so different contracts. And it's different if the company is just going through a paymaster, or it's different if they're using John Marshall Media or Mosaic Audio, or they've subcontracted it out. And it's different if this and it's different if that. But I think that's been part of the success, Anna, is that we have been able to meet certain reasonable needs, of publisher by publisher. Now, our producer contracts are starting to be a lot more, I don't want to say take it or leave it, but we have committed that we would not position our producers, we would not put them at a competitive disadvantage. So the rates are the same across the board so that anybody who is a signatory, who is a union partner, who's trying to get work from HarperCollins, for example, is starting at the same baseline in terms of how they can bid out that work. But the publishers do have some unique provisions that are important to them.
Yeah. Can I ask what might sound like an odd question, but if I asked you, why would a new narrator want to join?
Well, boy, oh boy.
I guess I'm asking so many things. I'm asking, what are the requirements, and I'm asking as a devil's advocate, really, because over here in the UK, it's a very different ballgame with regards to health and pension. And I do appreciate the importance and the relevance for narrators. So I really just want to hear you say it.
Absolutely. So there's a variety of reasons, but going back to your, how does it work first? I'll start there. You are eligible to join SAG AFTRA based upon any one quote unquote principal job. That would be, a day player or a weekly player on a film or a television project or a commercial or an audiobook. That is considered principal employment, an audiobook under a union contract. So you become eligible via working under a SAG AFTRA collective bargaining agreement. In audiobooks, by the way, that can be a very manual sort of process. So if folks joining us today are looking themselves up on the SAG AFTRA eligibility tracker, website, part of our website, and don't find themselves, Andrea or myself, we're very happy to help people be made eligible. We just need to know a title and, that you were paid by Elgin Productions or what have you, and we just find the report and do that because it's not always automatic. Why would you want to join? One, I'll put the negative thing up front. Most of our contracts contain what is known as union shop or union security language. So the companies are committing that they are really only going to use people in good standing with SAG AFTRA, at least at some point. So in some cases, it might say after 3 titles that you've done for that company or, what have you. So In many cases, you're just going to be told that you really need to tender initiation and dues to the union because that is the only way, that is all we operate on, right? My salary, the salaries of 550 other employees, the 20 offices or whatever we have around the country, we only operate on member dues and initiation fees. So one way that we get people to join, I don't have to do this in audiobooks very often. I think once that I can recall, is we can actually tell you that unfortunately we may have to let employers know that they cannot continue to hire you unless you get into good standing. That wouldn't apply, Anna, to people who live overseas because our contracts don't automatically extend to those folks.
I'm also aware that we spend all of our time promoting SAG AFTRA and encouraging people to meet the minimum, get involved, and people are always so proud to show their card online when they finally manage to flip their, the work that they've done and all those things. So people are obviously very excited by it all.
So I was going to say that in audiobooks, I really have to say that most people come to us and say that they want to join, they want to have the benefits of membership, including access to, SAG AFTRA Foundation casting access projects or the credit union or, the health plan, the retirement plan, or, a variety of things. Our resource list, right? We have a casting audition resource list for audiobooks that's quite robust, that is only available to members. It's a benefit of membership. Attending our meetings, voting on contracts. We had a national member narrator meeting in early May, wherein that group really determined that we would move forward with that new member rule around licensing your voice for AI purposes, et cetera. So participation, but yeah, it also signals. I mean, sounds a little corny, but it does signal to the companies on some level, a level of professionalism, and they again have said that they want to have a contract to access those professional narrators, and that they will make sure that the narrators, in fact, are a part of that family at some point.
Yes, yeah. We've got a couple of people in the chat saying lots of lovely things. Marcus says, so that's why he couldn't find himself on the site. It's fascinating to hear how many other resources there are that become available to you as a member. Are you happy for people to reach out to you at the union to ask any questions if they're curious about joining? How would they go about on the website, is there a...
Absolutely. They can reach out to me if you need help with eligibility for audiobooks or you want a conversation about membership. Absolutely. My name, email address, phone number, everything is on the website, sagaftra.org/audiobooks. Under audiobook contracts, it's my name and email and phone, Rich Larkin's name, email and phone, and Andrea Henderson's name, email, phone. So we're here for anybody who wants to have that conversation.
May I also ask, so I spoke to, it must have been Andrea, at the conference in Atlanta about what happens to the P&H when you're not yet a member, but the company you're working for is offering you a union contract.
That's a great question. Andrea wasn't at VO Atlanta, so I don't know who answered that.
I spoke to. Yeah, I don't know who I spoke to then. A very lovely lady.
it might be. We had colleagues from a lot of departments at that particular conference. So the health and pension funds, health and retirement funds are not like individual accounts, right? They're what is known as Taft-Hartley defined benefit plans. They're defined benefit plans. They're multi-employer defined benefit plans governed by ERISA laws here. And so what happens is all signatories, even companies like Warner Brothers, NBC Universal, et cetera, they all sign union contracts and agree to make contributions on whoever they hire in a union covered position, right? So on a film, that's anybody on camera or with lines off camera, but not the camera people and the crew and the makeup artists, et cetera, right? So anybody they hire under a SAG AFTRA contract, they have to make contributions on. The same is true in audiobooks. And what happens is it is sort of a Robin Hood plan, if you will, that the contributions on celebrity earnings way beyond, the minimum threshold to qualify, contributions on people who never join. Sometimes there are sports figures who only appear in one campaign and, may not ever work in our jurisdiction again and don't join, that sort of thing. And frankly, on members who never qualify for that health coverage. Sadly, there's a fairly large number of those people too, but not so much in audiobooks. But all of those contributions go to keeping the threshold number, level attainable and low enough. Because so right now it's just under $27,000 that you have to earn in any 4 calendar quarters in order to qualify for health coverage, just for example. And it sounds like a lot of money, but most audiobook narrators, frankly, do that relatively easily. That does not begin to pay for the coverage that you and your family can enjoy for that money. In fact, I think the trustees of the plan say that you really have to earn somewhere closer to $100,000 a year to begin to sort of the 13.5% or whatever that goes in on your earnings for that to actually cover what it costs to provide you with the coverage. It is incredible coverage. I encourage anybody who's interested to visit sagaftraplans.org. It's Anthem, Blue Cross Blue Shield. It's a PPO. It involves vision, dental, prescription drug, medical, hospitalization. I'm leaving out something. There's a small life insurance policy. There's a small loss of voice policy. That it is incredible. And I will tell you that, to cover me and my family is about $700 per quarter in premiums. Quarter, not month.
Wow. We've got a couple of questions in the chat, and then I'm just going to do a reset of the room. Steve Corona says, sorry if you've already answered this. Are you a must-join talent after 3 SAG AFTRA audiobooks like with film and TV?
No, it's not. It has not been asked and answered. The answer is that it depends. So admittedly, there are some contracts where we do not even have a union security clause. We have decided in certain cases that it's better to have a contract and to not worry about that if there is a philosophical concern on the part of the company, et cetera. And in the contracts where we do have those clauses, it varies. Some say after 3 jobs with that company. Some just have very general language about the fact that in accordance with labor law, the 1947 Taft-Hartley Act, that the company will comply with that, which means 30 days after your first audiobook job. But I don't want people to get too hung up on it. Here's the truth. We really have only had to worry about that in as far as I can recall, one instance where we just decided that after quite a long time of somebody not joining and making a very good living because of our efforts, right? Because of the work that we do, where, we had to send that sort of difficult note that said, if you are really going to exercise your right not to join the union, then we also have to enforce our contracts and let the following companies know that they may not continue to work with you. That has happened once. So, and we're in 2023. So I wouldn't get too hung up on it. But if anybody feels that they might be in that situation and wants to chat about that, I am happy to have that conversation offline as well.
Lovely. Well, I'm just going to do a room reset. We're here with Jane Love of SAG AFTRA. Thank you for those of you who've joined us. She's the National Director of Audiobooks for SAG AFTRA in the United States. Please do put some questions in the chat and or raise your hand or write your question in the chat if you'd like. Hopefully we can get to it. And these questions now that are coming this next half hour, it's like a random, I feel like I'm spinning the wheel on you, Jane, because they're coming from all angles. I'm going to start with my favorite question, which I always ask everybody, and I forgot to ask it. Do you have a favorite emoji?
Oh my gosh.
It's to relax you into the question this section.
No, I'm reading Craig's question too, and I'm happy to address it. The emoji question is much more difficult, to be honest. I have so many. Well, I love.
Keep it at the back of your mind, and I'll ask you at the very end.
Okay.
So for everybody else, Craig has said, is there any traction on paying royalties to narrators if a title earns out production costs and or becomes a bestseller?
Yeah, so the difficult answer is not a lot. And I'm not known for being. I wouldn't have said I was terribly diplomatic before now, and in a room full of professionals who I represent, or I think I like to think I represent. I like to be very honest and say we haven't gone a long way there. We do have, as everybody probably knows, we have some what we call additional compensation with recorded books. That contract is very mature. And so, we've been able to improve that one maybe more than others over time. We also, at one point, had to freeze rates for 3 years in order to maintain that back end compensation.
Wow.
We had this very conversation at the national member narrator meeting in early May, Craig. And I'll be honest, there's a very small group of people who thinks that's a huge priority. And the reason is as follows. People may or may not believe this, but we are privy to some sales data that is proprietary and that I can't share. But it's remarkable the percentage of audiobooks that actually don't make a lot of money. And I think that the theory or the feeling on the part of a lot of people is that if you're not somebody who's frequently doing really front list titles, that you may have more to lose by going that route than to gain, because the companies aren't going to do this without either freezing or possibly even rollbacks on upfront rates. Now, I understand, and we do continue to try, and we have introduced that concept with a company with whom we're in negotiations right now. I'm not going to share who that is for a lot of reasons, and they are open to being potentially a leader in this space for titles that really hit big. I mean, that's where we are hoping to start. Like, okay, maybe not for everything, but what about something that is just an unequivocal, clear hit is how we are broaching it at this time. And if anybody has concerns about that or issues with that or something that they think we should know as we enter those conversations, I am delighted to hear it.
Yeah. Well, our next question is from Regina in the chat, and it actually matches up with a question that was sent in by Jim. So Regina's question is, when dealing with independent authors, what's the best way of working to get them to a union contract or for union compensation?
Yeah, I love this one. I am looking at the chat too, but I know you're reading it for the
hard work,
gathering.
We're juggling.
Yeah. So the easiest thing to do, in my view, would be to encourage them to consider signing what we call a one production only or a one book only contract. We did more than 400 of these last year, almost exclusively with indie authors, self-publishing. They are a group that are generally delighted to help you make your work union covered and help contribute, make sure those earnings contribute to your health and retirement threshold eligibility. I am happy to show you all a template of what that looks like. It's a 3-page document. No author has ever brought in an attorney, we have had very little resistance. So that's the easiest way and the most flexible way in terms of the minimum rate. Right now, if you're doing the post-production work for that author, our minimum would be $250 per finished hour plus 14% for that health and retirement contribution. If you're not doing the post work, we can go as low, not that I want to go low, but our low rock bottom minimum for an indie author self-publishing would be $195 per finished hour plus that 14%. That's the easiest. Thanks, Chris Shula. That's the easiest way. The other way that you can do it is you can go through a union signatory paymaster like Skywire or Elgin. You'd have to get the bottom line rates from them. It is more expensive. You have to charge a higher rate. We've done that fairly intentionally to encourage companies and authors to have direct relationships with us. But I will say, too, that they would be required, those companies would be required in that instance to at least get your author to sign off on something we're affectionately calling an Exhibit A form, where they are agreeing to not do anything with respect to synthetic voice creation or licensing or reuse of the material in other media without bargaining with the union and obviously, compensation. So you should
Absolutely.
feel protected either way.
Yeah. Before we move into AI, because I've got a lot of questions on that, Jim's question, which sounds a little like Finley's. Jim said, when working with indie authors or small press, what's the difference between using a paymaster or creating an OPO? Is there an advantage to one over the other?
Yeah, well, so because of the AI and reuse document, maybe not as much as there used to be. But if you can't get to the paymaster rates, I mean, the minimum rate in the paymaster agreement is $260 if you're not doing post, plus their fee, plus the health and retirement. It's $300 plus their fee, plus health and retirement if you are doing the post. So the advantage would be that you could give the author a more favorable rate and still do it under a union contract. That's the primary one.
Okay. And Finley says, do they have to become a signatory after a certain amount of, remind us what OPO stands for?
Yep, one production only agreement. Thank you, Finley.
Thank you.
We can only offer 3 of those to any one entity or author, and then they do need to either become a signatory to a term agreement, meaning it applies to all the books they produce in audio, or they can, then at that point, go to the paymaster if for whatever reason they don't want to do that. Now, when I say we can offer 3 one production only or OPO agreements, in spite of the name, it can cover each one can cover more than one book. So, for example, we've done with a number of authors, we've covered a whole series under one agreement. So they end up getting, 20 books
Yes.
under three of these contracts, if that makes any
Wonderful.
sense.
No, that's great. That's great. I'm trying to organize these questions in order. So Matt Bates says, the work you've done is fantastic. Matt is a fellow Brit. And here in the UK, we struggle to get equity to take us seriously. I don't know. We have an audio committee. We don't necessarily have a representative. And Matt says, the work you've done is fantastic. What advice would you give the UK union reps to move towards parity in a digital marketplace? We're currently offered around $120 a finished hour, and that's in studio or from home. It seems to be non-negotiable. It's the industry standard, and we can't seem to get them to give us any attention.
Boy, and I hate to, I never want to be in a position of, in any way, shape, or form, even sound like I'm denigrating a fellow union, because I'm not. But I will tell you, Matt, we've been asked many, many times by British Equity to have that conversation about how we did it. I know I'm not going to come up with names, I don't think, other than Kathy Sweet, who I know is no longer there. But her replacement also reached out. I know that our national executive director also asked us to talk to somebody very high level at one point following a meeting of FIA, the Federation of International Artists, the conglomeration of entertainment unions from around the world. So we have spoken to British Equity probably 4 times. And I'll just say this, when you say how to get them to take you seriously, it was actually my impression that they were struggling, the staff there felt more like they were struggling with the membership being willing to do the work of the organizing. And again, it's recall here, right? That they don't quite feel like the whole group will stick together and, if need be, take a job action over it. Now, I could be wrong about that, but that was my impression.
Yeah. Well, we'll go back with that and see what how far we can get. I think the general feeling on the ground, in my house, is all I can really speak for, is more to do with the actual production houses even being willing to sit down and have the conversation. So I think it's a we're beating it around the bush without actually having the right conversation in the right places. So hopefully everybody will follow your example and, we'll get there in the end.
I do want to say that, and this is not a rah-rah, and I apologize. I know I'm taking up a lot of time here, but I do want to say we would never, Rich and I, or Ralph, or any one of us on staff, never would have been successful, but for the fact that the industry here knew that we had leverage, we had the membership behind us, we had the Cassandra Campbells and the Scott Bricks and everybody was willing to actually decline work in order to set these standards. So I would just say that's another reason. Please join the union if you're going to stay in this profession, because it does inure to the benefit of everybody if the industry knows that we maintain the best of the best in the industry. We all benefit. We all get better terms and conditions and have more leverage at the bargaining table.
We really are better together. And speaking of which, Jim sent in another question, which was, if there's a strike, what can we as narrators do to support our union brothers and sisters?
Yeah, isn't that lovely? It does not impact audiobook contracts, as I hope you all know. I've been getting a lot of questions. And I did send an email out to our national narrator list, which I would also like to say, if any of you do not receive narrator-specific emails from me periodically, 2 or 3 a year, and would like to be on our list, whether you are a member or not, you should feel free to email Andrea Henderson, andrea.henderson@sagaftra.org. She will add you. So the strike, of course, if called, would be for contracts with the Alliance of Motion Picture Television Producers and would not impact any of our audiobook contracts. I need to be clear about that because we have no strike, no lockout clauses in those agreements, so we need to honor them. But what you can do would be to, if you are a member, you can get, I hope you get emails from SAG AFTRA. I hope you've been getting the WGA, the notices about where to go to support WGA actions. You will get those same notices, certainly, if there is a strike on the part of SAG AFTRA. And if you're not a member and you want to support those efforts, sign up to receive my emails, or perhaps you're in the audiobook crowd in Facebook. I'm sure that there will be a lot of sharing about picket line opportunities. Not all of us will have them, depending upon where we live in the world or this country. But that would be the best way, is to show up and hold a sign and walk a line. And thank you for asking, Jim. I will ask our communications department and our legal department if there are other things that might be useful.
Wonderful. Thank you. I have a question about AI, but it's about audio description rather than audiobooks. So could you just talk to us about the new rule around AI voice licensing?
Sure. So we were pretty excited about this, actually. I don't know if everybody knows that in the union, there's this thing called Global Rule 1, which means that in other areas of SAG AFTRA's jurisdiction, like where there's one contract, so for example, the theatrical motion picture contract or the commercials contract, members are not supposed to work ever without the benefit of a union contract. That rule doesn't actually apply in audiobooks. And I would say that's another reason, candidly, that we've been pretty successful in having people want to come forward and join, because they don't necessarily have to stop taking the royalty share work through ACX that they've been doing. They don't have to turn down that work that they're doing for the indie author who isn't paying close to our minimum scales. They are not in violation. Our members in audiobooks are not in violation of SAG AFTRA rules by working non-union. That's just the truth of it. It's not something I like to put in an email. I'd appreciate it if people wouldn't go out and promote that from this meeting, but that's the truth of it. I don't like to encourage people to work non-union. I think there's a lot of risks in doing so. We've collected payments from defaulters, and we've spent lots of money going to arbitration and then enforcing that award in court, et cetera. And you don't want to have to do that yourself, and particularly with AI. But that's the truth of it. So The new membership rule is exclusive to licensing your voice for machine learning and AI voice creation, distribution, use. And the Audiobook Steering Committee, the National Audiobook Steering Committee, appointed by the national president and approved by the national board, first said, when we found out about some people perhaps licensing their voice to Apple Books, we need to do something here. We need to protect the industry. We need to protect narrators who may not be asked to license their voice. We need to do whatever we can to protect human performance in this space. And we consulted with senior management. We consulted with that member meeting in early May of more than 300 people showed up, which is quite a good showing, I think, for a meeting. Everybody was supportive. Then the national board approved it. And so that's what this speaks to is the commitment that the member audiobook narrator community has shown to say, we are not going to license our voice for this purpose without a union contract. Because what we want to do, for those of you on the line, is when we do make an agreement around AI, we want to make sure that things like it is identified for the consumer as being non-human voice narration. We want to make sure that if we do it with a good partner, that there's a human narration quota, right? Like you still have to produce 1,000 books, human voice. And this is only to supplement, your library. We want to make sure the voices are safely stored. We want to make sure there's appropriate compensation and oversight, right? So that you have the right to say, no, I don't want my book. I don't want my name associated with this particular title. I don't do erotica, or I don't do, politically offensive books, or whatever the case may be. So we're ready to bargain when somebody gets there and is ready to do so, but we want to do so in a responsible manner. We also want to make sure that if there's any violation of the agreement, that you are not left on the hook, and that we would assume all the costs of litigating the problem.
Wonderful. And Claudia's question is not necessarily audiobook specific, but she says, are there specific efforts being taken by SAG to add language in the audio description contracts, of which there are several, or to attach an AI rider to regulate usage of description voices as well? Does that cover your remit?
No, it doesn't. The audio description services agreements, which I believe there are a few, WBUR, there's one in LA, I know for sure, that would be governed, I believe, by the voiceover department, or maybe I know Steve Mikey and Jessica Marr, who's the executive director in New England, have a lot to do with those negotiating those agreements. I'm afraid that's not my area, and I apologize.
No, not at all. Well, let me just give you 30 seconds to think about your emoji answer while I remind the audience that we've only got 3 or 4 minutes left. Do feel free to raise your hand and come up and ask Jane a question, or put something in the chat if you'd like me to read it out instead. It's a great opportunity. I can't actually believe that Jane has taken an hour to come and sit with us and chat about all of this, because it's all absolutely fascinating and incredibly good for us all. As I said, even as a non-member, I apologize for not being a member, but I do get to benefit from the rules and regulations that you organize and set, because it allows me to, as I imagine the union members do, come to contracts from a place of strength.
Do you mind if I just add, though, that Anna, that in your situation, I feel very differently about your not being a member than I do about U.S.-based individuals. So I just want to be clear for those joining us in this chat that I feel pretty strongly that those of you living and working in the U.S. should become members. I feel differently about folks based overseas, because I cannot force the companies to apply the terms and conditions of the contracts to folks outside the 50 United States. They do mostly. And, yes. Because we have members, of course, all over the world. They do mostly do it, but I can't force them. So I guess, otherwise I might feel very differently about that situation. And I just want to be clear that I really do hope that all of you who do live here and who are automatically afforded those minimum terms and conditions. And again, I don't mean to say that I walked 5 miles to school every day, uphill both
both
ways.
ways.
But we have really come a long way. And I think
Yes.
many of you do not know how really difficult things were. And I know we have a lot to achieve. And Craig, thank you, again, for bringing up that, residuals and royalties are certainly part of that forward-looking thing. But it is really remarkable just what we've been able to accomplish together in roughly 15 years.
Absolutely. And I think it also reminds all of us, regardless of members or not, to raise the bar, Jane, which is what you're doing all the time. It reminds us that there is a minimum standard and that we should all be working for it and for more. It's the whole better together is just a much nicer. Finley says, you see, the actual best. So well done. Well, Jane, I'm afraid it only remains then for you to tell us a story about emojis, because you obviously have more than one favorite. And I need to know.
I do. And I don't know the name for a lot of them because I'm really old, as you all have gathered since I've been here 34 years. You're lucky I know how to get onto Clubhouse, to be frank. But the one where you're showing that really cheesy face, like the big toothy smile. I use that a lot because I make a lot of jokes and I don't love the laughing, with tears coming out of your eyes emoji. So I use that one to be a little more subtle. And I think I use it the wrong way. So you all can laugh at me and send that crazy emoji to me. I also, I love and use the heart emojis a ton because I have, a child who has some depression and anxiety, and I talk with them every day. And I love that one.
Wonderful, wonderful. I personally think the emojis become part of
I see
relationships.
Anna. Is that what it's called? That you just used it?
Yeah, I assume that's the one you meant, with the big smile, all the teeth. Yes. I know that I use emojis differently with different people. So with my 2 daughters, they're in their 20s, and we have it's like a secret language. And yet they are emojis I don't use with other people because it might not mean the same thing. So I think there's almost a whole other language going on within relationships about emojis, which is why I just find them so fascinating. Well, thank you for sharing. Thank you for sharing that with us, Jane. And thank you again for sharing this hour with us and for taking the time to come and chat and answer all of these questions. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very, very much.
Oh, you are so welcome. I'd love to come back sometime.
Well, anytime.
See you all
please
soon.
do. Absolutely. Thank you. Today we talked to Jane Love, the National Director of Audiobooks for SAG AFTRA. Thank you so much, Jane. My takeaways, we really are better together. If you have more questions for Jane, do send them in. We'll have her back. It's been absolutely wonderful. Thank you very much to everybody who joined us today. For Jane on the sofa, those who participated in the chat, thank you to everybody who listened for just being here, those who are listening on replay. Do make sure you have a wonderful week, everybody, and thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Jane Love. Thank you very much for listening in and joining us on this podcast. Do remember to like and subscribe. It really does help. Further details are in the show notes, and if you'd like to work with me or need any further information, do get in touch. Thank you for listening.